Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had to protect everyone alone. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. It arrived, instead, with a sound that Izuku Midoriya had never heard on a battlefield before. It arrived with absolute silence. Minutes earlier, the Sky Coffin, the UA flying fortress designed to cage the apex predator Tamura Shigaraki, had been a cacophony of violence. The air was thick with the ozone stench of ionized air, the metallic tang of blood, and the relentless, thundering impacts of One for All clashing against All for One. Izuku was moving at speeds that defied physics, his body a conduit for the accumulated power of 8 generations. He was a blur of green lightning and determination, trading blows with a monster who wore the face of a tragedy. Is that all? Shigaraki had screamed, his voice a distorted duality of his own rage and All for One's calculated malice. His body was a mutating mass of fingers and flesh, adapting, evolving, seeking to devour. You fight to save a society of dust, Midoriya. Let me turn it all to ash. Izuku had grit his teeth, the vestiges screaming warnings in the back of his mind. Danger sense was a constant, throbbing migraine, warning him of decay, of air blasts, of rivets popping from the floating island beneath their feet. I won't let you! Izuku roared, winding back a fist charged with Fa gene and the centrifugal force of Black Whip. Texas. Smash! The impact was cataclysmic. The shockwave parted the clouds for miles, shattering the windows of the fortress's control towers. Shigaraki was sent skidding back, his heels carving deep trenches into the reinforced steel plating of the arena. But Shigaraki didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. Instead, a smile stretched across his face, a smile that didn't belong to the boy who wanted to destroy, but to the man who wanted to rule. The eyes changed. The chaotic red of Tenko Shimura was swallowed by a void-like darkness. You possess a great deal of power, Izuku Midoriya. The voice of All for One spoke through Shigaraki's lips, smooth and terrifyingly calm amidst the carnage. But power requires a conduit. It requires a will to channel it. And wills are fragile things. Second. Fourth. Izuku shouted internally. What is he doing? Something is wrong. The first user's voice echoed, sounding frantic. He's not drawing on a quirk factor. He's inverting one. He's collapsing his own singularity. Shigaraki slammed both hands onto the floor of the floating fortress. Izuku prepared to jump. He expected decay. He expected the steel to turn to gray dust and the sky to open up beneath them. He charged One for All to 45%, ready to float, ready to grab everyone with Black Whip. But the decay didn't come. Instead, a pulse of black light erupted from Shigaraki's contact point. It wasn't energy. It was the absence of it. It looked like a ripple of ink dropped into clear water, expanding outward at the speed of thought. It washed over the debris, over the terrified cameramen in the helicopters miles away, over the heroes fighting desperately on the perimeter. It washed over Izuku. For a split second, Izuku felt a sensation like falling asleep while drowning. A cold, heavy pressure seized his heart. The connection to One for All sputtered, like a candle in a hurricane. He saw the vestiges flicker and dim, their voices cut off mid-scream. Run, a voice whispered, not a vestige, but pure instinct. Then, the black wave expanded past the horizon, covering the evacuation zones, the support bunkers, and the distant city. And then, the noise stopped. Izuku gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was lying on his back. The sky above him was a bruised purple, the clouds stagnant and unmoving. Pain flared in his ribs, a dull, throbbing reminder of the battle, but it felt distant, muffled. He sat up, his breath hitching in his throat. Shigaraki! He shouted, scrambling to his feet, his fists raising automatically into a guard. I'm not done yet. There was no answer. The arena was devastated, craters and scorch marks painting a picture of the titanic struggle, but it was empty. The mutating mass of flesh and hatred that was Shigaraki was gone. Danger sense? Izuku queried internally. The quirk was active, but it wasn't the sharp, stabbing pain of immediate hostility. It was a low, resonant hum, like the vibration of a high-tension wire just before it snaps. It was warning him of everything, and yet nothing specific. Izuku lowered his guards slowly, his green eyes scanning the wreckage. Hello? Best Jeanist? Bakugo? Mirko? His voice didn't echo. The air felt heavy, viscous, swallowing the sound the moment it left his lips. He took a step forward, and the sound of his iron soul hitting the metal plating was deafeningly loud. Clang! He broke into a run, the green lightning of full cowl flickering around him. He needed to find the others. They had been right behind him. Bakugo had been providing cover fire. Best Jeanist had been securing the perimeter. He found Bakugo first. Katsuki Bakugo was lying face down near a pile of twisted girders, his hero costume torn, his gauntlets scorched. Kaken! Izuku skidded to a halt, dropping to his knees beside his childhood friend. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. Kaken, wake up! We have to move! He grabbed Bakugo's shoulder and rolled him over. Izuku recoiled. Bakugo's eyes were open. But the fierce, burning crimson that usually defined him was dull, glazed over with a milky sheen. He wasn't blinking. He was breathing, slow, shallow breaths that barely lifted his chest, but he wasn't there. Kaken? Izuku shook him. Hey! Stop joking around. Wake up. Bakugo's head lolled to the side, limp as a ragdoll. There was no resistance. No scowl. No explosion. Izuku pressed 2 fingers to Bakugo's neck. A pulse. It was there. Rhythmic, slow, steady, like he was in a deep, medically induced coma. He's alive, Izuku whispered, his hands trembling. But why isn't he waking up? He looked at his own hands. Why was he awake? The black wave had hit them both. Jeanist! Izuku yelled, standing up and boosting himself with 5% power to leap over a wall of debris. He found the number 3 hero entangled in his own fiber cables, slumped against a crushed turret. Best Jeanist was in the same state, eyes open, unseeing, breathing shallowly, completely unresponsive. Izuku sprinted across the fortress. He found Mirko, her prosthetic leg sparked and broken, lying amidst rubble. Comatose. He found Ed shot, half-folded, his body limp and paper-thin. Comatose. Everyone. Every single hero who had been fighting on the coffin. Izuku tapped his comms bead. Eraserhead. Mandalay. Can you hear me? This is Deku. Something's happened to the Vanguard. We need immediate medical assistance. Everyone is down. I repeat, everyone is down. Static. Not the static of a bad signal, but the white noise of a completely dead frequency. Tsukachi-san? All Might? Silence. Izuku looked over the edge of the fortress. The flying island was currently drifting over the outskirts of the combat zone. Below, he could see the shapes of the other battlefields. The Gunga Mountain Villa ruins. The Kamino Ward remnants. Usually, even from this height, the sounds of quirks, explosions, ice glaciers cracking, giants roaring, would drift up. But the world below was still. What did you do? Izuku whispered to the empty air. Izuku, the voice was faint, sounding like it was coming from underwater. It was the first user, Yoichi. Izuku clutched his head. First. What's happening? Why can't I wake them up? The stasis. Yoichi's voice wavered. All for one. He combined the theft of quirk factors with a sensory deprivation field. He targeted the spark of consciousness that allows a quirk to function. He tried to snuff out the lights of resistance. Why am I awake? Izuku demanded. Because you are not one light. The second user, Kudo, cut in, his voice harsh and strained. You are a bonfire. The singularity. One for all has grown too dense, too multifaceted. The wave tried to put you into stasis, but the sheer volume of souls within one for all rejected the command. We took the hit for you. We are fading 9th. We can keep you awake, but we cannot manifest. So everyone else, they're trapped? Trapped in their own minds? Yoichi whispered. Quirkless. Defenseless. Sleeping. Izuku looked down at Bakugo's motionless form. The horror of the situation began to dawn on him. It wasn't just that they were asleep. It was where they were. Groan. A massive, terrifying sound reverberated through the soles of Izuku's boots. The entire fortress lurched violently to the left. Izuku stumbled, planting his feet to catch his balance. A section of the outer wall crumbled, sending tons of steel plummeting toward the clouds below. What was that? Izuku yelled. He looked toward the central control tower. Smoke was billowing from the anti-gravity engines. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The heroes piloting the fortress. The electrical types powering the engines. Skeptics controlled puppets keeping the gyroscopes spinning. If the wave hit everyone. Oh no, Izuku breathed. The pilots. The fortress tilted again, steeper this time. A 15-degree listing. Gravity was reclaiming its prize. The sky coffin, a structure the size of a small city, weighing millions of tons, was beginning to fall, and thousands of unconscious heroes were on it. I have to stop it, Izuku said, the panic turning into a cold, hard resolve. Ninth, the mass is too great. The fifth user, Banjo, yelled, his voice barely audible. You can't lift an island, I don't have to lift it. Izuku shouted, green lightning erupting around him, the energy crackling darker, fiercer than before. I just have to catch it. He didn't think. He acted. Izuku crouched low and launched himself toward the center of the fortress, toward the structural heart of the island. He moved so fast the air cracked behind him. He landed in the central plaza, where the four main support pylons converged. The ground was tilting aggressively now. 30 degrees. Unconscious bodies began to slide. Black whip! Izuku roared. Tendrils of black energy, thicker than tree trunks, exploded from his back. They weren't the precise, whip-like cords he usually used. These were massive, writhing cables of pure force, fueled by hysterical strength. He sent them shooting outward. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The tendrils slammed into the four cardinal pylons of the fortress, punching through steel and wrapping around the reinforced beams. Izuku stood in the center, his arms crossed over his chest, anchoring himself. Float. He activated the seventh user's quirk. He poured every ounce of power he had into it. Usually, float was used to make himself weightless. Now, he was trying to impose his own buoyancy onto the megastructure tethered to his spine. The cables went taut. Crack. The sound of his own bones protesting was lost under the groan of the metal. Izuku screamed as the weight of the city slammed into him. It felt like the sky itself had collapsed onto his shoulders. His boots ground into the floor plates, tearing through the metal until he was buried up to his shins. Up! He screamed, his eyes glowing a luminous, terrifying green. Go up! The descent slowed. The fortress groaned, the metal screeching in protest. The black whip tendrils vibrated, singing with tension. Izuku's muscles tore and knitted back together instantly, the smoke of his own exertion rising from his skin. He channeled Fa Gene. He built up the kinetic energy of his trembling muscles, the beating of his heart, the very vibration of the collapsing structure, and he released it in a burst of upward thrust. Boom! The air beneath him detonated. The fortress shuddered, and stopped falling. It hung there, suspended in the sky, drifting lazily. Izuku was the pin in the grenade, the atlas holding the world. He was hovering 10 feet off the deck, his body the only thing keeping the fortress from plummeting into the earth. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the blood from a cut on his forehead. I got it, he wheezed, his voice ragged. I got it. You can't hold this forever, kid, Banjo warned. You're burning calories like a furnace. I know, Izuku gritted out. I just need to stabilize it. The emergency thrusters, if I can just... He couldn't leave the center. If he let go, the balance would shift, and the fortress would tumble. But he couldn't stay here either. He looked to his left. A body was sliding down the tilted deck, rolling toward the edge of the abyss. It was Mirko. No! Izuku yelled. He couldn't release the main cables. He had to multitask. He gritted his teeth, a vein bulging in his temple, and sprouted a fifth tendril of black whip from his ribcage. It shot out, snake-like, darting across the plaza. It wrapped around Mirko's waist just as she slipped over the edge. Izuku yanked her back, depositing her gently near his feet. Then he saw another. Sun Eater. Sliding past a broken wall. A sixth tendril. Snatch. Then another. Nijire Hado. A seventh tendril. Snatch. Izuku panted, his vision swimming. He was holding the fortress together with 4 massive limbs of energy, and using 3 others to play a desperate game of catch with the unconscious bodies of his friends. I have to bring them here, Izuku muttered, his mind racing. The panic room. It's in the central sublevel. It's reinforced. Independent air supply. He began the grueling process. Slowly, agonizingly, he manipulated the black whip tendrils to drag the heroes toward the central elevator shaft. He had to rip the doors open with a whip, then gently lower them down into the darkness of the bunker below. One by one, Bakugo, Genist, Mirko, Tamaki, Nijire. He scanned the area with his eyes, desperate to ensure he hadn't missed anyone. Wait, where was the enemy? The silence was still heavy, but now that the immediate thunder of the crash was averted, Izuku realized something terrifying. The fortress wasn't just drifting. It was sinking slowly. The float quirk couldn't counteract the mass indefinitely without momentum. They were losing altitude, and as they dropped through the cloud layer, the view cleared. Izuku looked down, past the edge of the floating metal island. Below them, the ground was black. Not from soil or fire, but from bodies. The villain army. Thousands of them. The Paranormal Liberation Front remnants, the escaped convicts from Tartarus, the High-End Nomus. They were gathered in a massive circle directly beneath the drifting fortress. They were looking up, and they were silent, too, but it wasn't the silence of sleep. It was the silence of predators waiting for dinner to fall off the table. Danger sense spiked. It wasn't an attack. It was intent. Izuku saw movement near the front of the villain lines. A figure stood atop a ruined skyscraper. Even from this distance, Izuku recognized the white hair, all for one. Or was it Shigaraki? It didn't matter anymore. They were the architect of this silence. The figure raised a hand. He didn't fire an air cannon. He didn't launch a radio wave. He simply pointed at the fortress, and then made a come here motion with his finger. A roar erupted from the ground. It was the sound of thousands of villains screaming in unison. It broke the eerie silence like a hammer shattering glass. Then, the Nomus began to jump. Winged hyans took flight, screeching like banshees. Villains with climbing quirks began to scale the falling debris. Those with jump quirks leaped into the air. They were coming for the sleeping heroes. No, Izuku whispered. The weight of the fortress pressed down on his spine, threatening to crush him. He was tired. He was battered. He was alone. He looked at the elevator shaft where he had hidden his friends. Bakugo, who had always led the way. All Might, who was likely somewhere far away, helpless. I'm the only one, Izuku realized. The thought was cold, but it crystallized into something hard and unbreakable in his chest. This was what it meant. This was what All Might had done for 40 years. Izuku tightened his grip on the black whip cables. He flared one for all to 60%, ignoring the screaming protest of his fractured bones. The green lightning intensified, turning from a flicker into a beacon. It bathed the dark, ruined deck of the fortress in emerald light. He wasn't just holding the fortress up. He was holding the line. You want them? Izuku shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion but amplified by sheer will. He knew the villains couldn't hear him over the distance, but he needed to hear it himself. You want to get to them? He stepped forward, dragging the entire mass of the fortress with him. You have to go through me. As the first wave of winged Nomus breached the cloud layer, screeching and diving toward the deck, Izuku didn't flinch. He adjusted the tension on his left cables, freeing up his right arm. He took a breath. The air tasted of ash and responsibility. The silence was over. The siege had begun. 1 hour later, Izuku sat on the highest remaining parapet of the fortress. The first wave was dead. The corpses of 3 High-End Nomus lay broken on the steel deck, their regeneration factors unable to keep up with the sheer ferocity of the dismantling Izuku had given them. The rest had retreated, testing the waters, realizing the prey still had claws. Izuku was panting heavily. He had managed to lock the black whip cables into the physical winch systems of the fortress, tying them off manually so he didn't have to maintain active focus on holding the structure together. It was a crude fix. The fortress was listing dangerously and slowly losing altitude, but it freed his hands. He had dragged every body he could find into the panic room. He had sealed the blast doors. Now, he was the gatekeeper. He looked at his hands. His gloves were torn. His knuckles were raw. He reached for his belt and pulled out a small, crumpled nutrition bar. He unwrapped it with shaking fingers and took a bite. It tasted like sawdust. He swallowed it dry. Danger sense buzzed. He looked up. On the horizon, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, blood-red shadows across the battlefield. In the distance, he saw lights flickering on. Not city lights. Searchlights. The villains were setting up a perimeter. They were bringing in siege equipment. They were surrounding the crash site. Izuku pulled his cowl up over his head. The metal mouthguard clicked into place, hiding his fear, hiding his exhaustion. He was the Deku who saved everyone with a smile. But there was no one here to see him smile. And there was no one to save him. The comms unit in his ear crackled. A burst of static, then a voice. Daria? Midori? Is anyone alive? Izuku froze. He pressed a finger to his ear. Hello? This is Deku. Who is this? This is... Hatsum. The voice was filled with panic. May Hatsum. Support course. I was in the shielded workshop, everyone is asleep. Midoriya, the power is out, the life support. For the cryosleep heroes, it's failing. Izuku's blood ran cold. The heroes he had saved. Edge shot. Best genist. The ones with critical injuries who relied on technology to stay alive. How long do they have? Izuku asked, his voice steady, betraying none of the terror he felt. Without the main generator? May's voice trembled. Maybe 4 hours. Then the batteries die. And they die. Izuku looked out at the villain army surrounding them. He looked at the miles of hostile territory between him and any potential power source. He looked at the setting sun. I'll get a generator, Izuku said. You can't. May cried. There are thousands of them out there. And you're alone. Izuku stood up. The wind whipped his tattered cape around him. His green eyes glowed in the deepening twilight. I know, Izuku said softly. Lock the doors behind me, Hatsum. I'll be back. He stepped to the edge of the fortress. Below him, the darkness waited. Izuku Midoriya leaped into it. The descent from the upper parapets of the Ue fortress was not a flight. It was a controlled fall into bedlam. Izuku Midoriya landed in the central plaza of the civilian sector, his iron soles cracking the pavement. The impact sent a shockwave of dust rolling outward, momentarily obscuring the chaos that had erupted within the safe zones of the floating island. The silence that had gripped the battlefield outside did not exist here. Here, there was panic. The Ue fortress, now listing at a sickening 15-degree angle and hovering precariously low over the ruin of the Japan mainland, housed thousands of evacuees. These were the people without combat quirks, the elderly, the children, the families of the heroes. The stasis wave that All for One had unleashed had targeted the specific bioelectric resonance of active quirk factors, the soldiers. It had passed over the civilians like a ghost, leaving them awake to witness the collapse of their protectors. Stay back. Don't push. Where are the heroes? Why aren't they moving? The ship is falling. We're going to crash. Izuku stood up from his landing crouch, the green lightning of One for All fading to a low simmer around his skin. He looked around. It was a sea of terrified faces. People were trampling over one another, rushing toward the escape pods that had long since been jammed or disabled by the structural warping of the fortress, and scattered among the stampeding crowd were the fallen pro-heroes who had been assigned to internal security. Death Arms, Cementas, Ectoplasm, lay slumped against walls or face down in the middle of walkways. They were obstacles now, heavy, unmoving statues that the panicked crowd was tripping over. Please! Izuku shouted. His voice was raw, but he projected it with the diaphragm control All Might had taught him. Everyone stop! The sheer volume, amplified by a subtle application of Black Whip vibrating his throat, cut through the noise. Thousands of eyes turned toward him. For a moment, there was hope. They saw the tattered green costume. They saw the rabbit ear cowl. They saw a hero. It's Deku! Someone screamed. It's a hero! Save us! Get us off this thing! The mob surged forward. It wasn't an attack, but it was just as dangerous. A wall of desperate humanity crashed toward him, hundreds of hands reaching out to grab his cape, his arms, his legs. Where is Endeavor? My daughter is sick! Fix the engines! Izuku stumbled back, overwhelmed. He couldn't use his quirk. He couldn't push them away without hurting them. He felt the crushing weight of their expectations, heavier than the fortress itself. They didn't know. They didn't know he was the only one left. Breath 9th. The fourth user, Haiku Shinomori, whispered in his mind. Danger sense is clear. No malice. Just fear. You have to command them, don't ask for order. The second user, Kudo, barked. Enforce it. You are the commander now. Izuku closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the panic was gone, replaced by a cold, tactical clarity. Listen to me. Izuku roared, stomping his foot. He released a controlled burst of wind pressure, not enough to hurt, but enough to knock the front row off balance and force the crowd to recoil. Silence fell over the plaza. The fortress has been stabilized, Izuku lied. He didn't mention the failing gravity engines or the black whip cables currently holding the main pylons together miles above their heads. But we are under siege. The other heroes have been incapacitated by a villain quirk. A gasp rippled through the crowd. They are in a coma, Izuku continued, his voice steady. They cannot protect you right now. I am the only active pro on the fortress. Just you? A woman near the front whispered, clutching a crying toddler. But there are thousands of villains outside. Yes, Izuku said. He looked her in the eye. And I will stop every single one of them. But I cannot do that if you are running around in the open. You are targets here. He pointed toward the massive blast doors of the central academic building, the entrance to the UA shelter, a reinforced bunker deep within the chassis of the fortress designed for an extinction-level event. I need everyone to move to the central shelter immediately, Izuku ordered. Do not run. Do not push. If you see a fallen hero, do not leave them. I need volunteers to help drag them inside. If we leave them out here, they will die. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The fear of the only one comment paralyzed them. Then, a voice cut through the tension. You heard the man. Move your asses! Izuku looked to his left. Pushing through the crowd, covered in grease and soot, wearing a pair of high-tech goggles that were cracked down the middle, was Mei Hatsum. She didn't look like her usual manic self. Her face was pale, smeared with oil, but her eyes were sharp. She was dragging a hover dolly loaded with tools. Hatsum! Izuku breathed, relief flooding his chest. Mei marched up to him, grabbed the front of his torn costume, and yanked him down to her level. Midoriya, she hissed, low enough that the crowd couldn't hear. The gravity drives are at 14%. The backup generators are fried. We are running on batteries. If we don't consolidate the life support to the central node, the sleepers are going to suffocate in 3 hours. Izuku nodded, his expression hardening. That's why we're moving to the shelter. It has independent air filtration, right? Yes, but it's not big enough for everyone and the heroes, Mei countered. We're going to be packing them in like sardines. Pack them in, Izuku said. I don't care if they have to sleep standing up. No one stays outside the blast doors. Mei stared at him for a second. She seemed to notice the change in him, the lack of stuttering, the terrifying intensity in his eyes. She nodded once. I'll handle the logistics inside. I'll get the business course students to manage the rationing. You handle the outside. I will, Izuku promised. Mei turned to the crowd, raising a megaphone she had pulled from her dolly. All right, listen up. Form lines of 5. Strongest people to the front to carry the sleepers. Support course, on me. We have tech to salvage. The crowd began to move. It was messy, and there was sobbing, but it was movement. Izuku didn't watch them go. He turned his back to the safety of the shelter, and looked toward the perimeter wall. Danger sense was beginning to thrum. A low, rhythmic buzzing at the base of his skull. The sun had fully set. The perimeter was dark. It's starting, Izuku whispered. The sorting of souls. The next 2 hours were a blur of physical labor that would have killed a quirkless man. While Mei organized the civilians, Izuku became a one-man ambulance service. He couldn't trust the civilians to move the critically injured heroes or the heavier mutation types. He used Black Whip like a spider weaving a web. He would sprint to the far edges of the fortress, find a cluster of unconscious heroes, empty lady, shrunk down but still heavy, Kamui Woods, gang Orca, and bind them in tendrils of black energy. He carried them 6, 7 at a time, floating them behind him as he ran back to the shelter. The shelter was a massive underground gymnasium reinforced with tungsten plates. It was designed to hold the student body. Now, it held the population of a small city. The floor was a carpet of bodies. The comatose heroes were laid out in rows on one side, hookups from maze cobbled together life support machines running into their arms. The civilians huddled on the other side, watching with wide, fearful eyes as their saviors were treated like patients in a triage ward. Izuku dropped Gang Orca gently onto a mat next to Best Jeanist. He stood up, wiping sweat from his eyes. His arms burned. He was rationing one for all, keeping it at 5% for movement, but the mental strain of multitasking with Black Whip was giving him a nosebleed. That's the last of the outer sector, Izuku reported to Mei, who was frantically typing on a portable terminal. Good, Mei said without looking up. We've sealed the blast doors. The air scrubbers are running. But Midoriya, the power drain. With the doors sealed and the scrubbers on max, we're losing juice faster than I thought. How long? If we cut the lights? If we stop heating? Maybe 12 hours. Izuku clenched his fist. I'll find a solution. Just keep them alive. He turned to leave, to head back out to the wall. Izuku. The voice was soft, trembling, and it stopped him dead in his tracks. It cut through the mechanical hum of the air scrubbers and the murmur of the crowd. He froze. He knew that voice. He had heard it apologize to him 1,000 times in his childhood. Slowly, terrified of what he might see, Izuku turned around. Standing near the civilian partition, clutching a tattered blanket, was a small, stout woman with green hair. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked smaller than he remembered. Older. Mom, Izuku breathed. Inko Midoriya didn't run to him. She seemed frozen, staring at the figure before her. She was looking at his costume, the dark green fabric stained with blood, some his, some Shigaraki's, the iron saws scuffed and dented, the gauntlets cracked. She looked at his face, covered in soot, the scar on his cheek standing out angrily. She wasn't looking at her son. She was looking at a soldier. Izuku, she whimpered, stepping forward, her hands reaching out as if she were afraid he was an illusion. You're hurt. Izuku's instinct was to smile. To do the All Might grin. To say, I am fine. Why? Because I am here. But his face muscles wouldn't obey. The exhaustion was too deep. The lie was too big. He walked over to her and fell to his knees, not out of reverence, but because his legs momentarily gave out. He hugged her. He buried his face in her shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of laundry detergent and home, a sharp contrast to the smell of burning ozone that clung to him. I'm okay, Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm okay. Inko gripped him tight, her fingers digging into the back of his costume. She was shaking violently. Where is Tashinori? Where is Mitsuki? Where is everyone? Izuku pulled back slightly, looking into her terrified eyes. He had to make a choice. If he told her the truth, that All Might was likely dead or helpless, that Bakugo was in a coma 5 feet away, that they were completely alone against an army, she would break. The civilians would break. Despair was a contagion. And he had to be the quarantine. All Might is, he's on a mission, Izuku lied. The words tasted like ash. He's getting help. He's gathering reinforcements from America. From everywhere. So they're coming? Inko asked, hope warring with doubt in her eyes. We just have to wait. Yes, Izuku said. He took her hands in his gloved ones. They were so small. We just have to wait. I just have to hold the fort until they get here. But you're all alone out there, Inko cried, tears spilling over. Izuku, look at you. You can't fight an army. You're just a boy. I'm not a boy anymore, Mom, Izuku said softly. He stood up. The moment of vulnerability was over. The danger sense buzzing in his skull had spiked from a hum to a scream. Stay with Mei, Izuku ordered, his voice shifting back to the commander's tone. Help pass out the water. Keep everyone calm. If they see you panic, they'll panic. Izuku, I have to go. He turned and walked away. He didn't look back. If he looked back, he wouldn't be able to leave the perimeter of one. Izuku exited the shelter and stood on the roof of the main academic building. The blast doors hissed shut behind him, sealing the last of humanity in a steel tomb. He was now the only living thing on the surface of the Yui fortress. The night air was cold. The wind howled through the broken skyscrapers of the floating city. The fortress was dark, save for the faint emergency lights flickering along the main pathways. Izuku walked to the edge of the campus, where the ground of the island ended and dropped off into the abyss. He looked down. The landscape below was a nightmare. The villains had illuminated the crash zone with massive floodlights powered by electric-type quirks. The light washed up the sides of the fortress, casting long, grotesque shadows. They were climbing. It looked like a colony of ants swarming a picnic table. Thousands of figures were scaling the rocky underside of the floating island, using grappling hooks, mutation quirks, and raw strength. Danger Sense painted a 360-degree map in his mind. Threat. 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 Here we go, Izuku muttered. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small canister. Smokescreen. He didn't activate it yet. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, visualizing the stockpile of One for All. Usually, he would charge to 45% full cowl. He would use speed and power to blitz the enemy. You can't fight them all. The third user's voice echoed. If you use 45% constantly, you will burn out in an hour. You have to ration. Efficiency 9th. Brutal efficiency. I know, Izuku replied internally. He opened his eyes. They were cold. He dropped the smokescreen canister at his feet and stomped on it. Purple smoke exploded outward, thick and heavy. But instead of letting it drift, Izuku grabbed the cloud with Black Whip. He spun, whipping the tendrils around him, creating a vortex. He mixed the smoke with the dust of the ruins, creating a dense, opaque fog bank that rolled over the edge of the fortress, cascading down the sides like a waterfall. He shrouded the battlefield. If they wanted to come up, they would have to come through the dark. Izuku stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall. He caught himself with Black Whip on a protruding girder, hanging upside down in the mist. The first villain appeared out of the gloom, a man with 4 arms and jagged blades for fingers, climbing the rock face. He didn't see Izuku until it was too late. Izuku didn't scream smash. He didn't announce his presence. He swung. A precise, calculated kick to the villain's jaw using only 20% power, amplified by FA genes stored from the swing. Crack. The villain went limp instantly, falling back into the darkness below. 1, Izuku counted. 2 more villains lunged from the left. A woman who shot spikes from her skin and a brute with stone skin. Izuku released the girder and fell past them. As he passed, he shot 2 air bullets. Delaware Smash, Air Force. Thwip. Thwip. He aimed not for their bodies, but for their handholds. The rock shattered. The villains lost their grip, screaming as they plummeted. 2. 3. He caught himself on a lower ledge, 50 feet down the side of the fortress. He was fighting vertically. This was his domain. He had trained with Gran Torino. He knew how to move in 3D space. But they kept coming. A wave of fire erupted from below, illuminating the fog. A villain with a flamethrower quirk was clearing the mist. There he is! Someone shouted. Get the brat! Projectiles filled the air. Bullets, energy beams, rocks. Izuku moved. He was a green ghost. He bounded from rock to rock, dodging with minimal movement, letting danger sense guide him through the hail of fire. He couldn't save everyone. He couldn't arrest them, disable them. The second user urged. Don't be gentle. If they climb this wall, your mother dies. Break them. Izuku gritted his teeth. He grabbed a villain midair with Black Whip, swung him around, and slammed him into 2 others climbing next to him. The impact knocked all 3 off the wall. He wasn't acting like a hero. He was acting like a turret. The grind. An hour passed. Then 2. The initial rush had slowed, but it hadn't stopped. The villains realized that charging blindly into the fog was suicide, so they started changing tactics. They began to spread out. The perimeter of the fortress was miles long. Izuku couldn't be everywhere at once. Danger sense spiked sharply on the north side. Far away. Breach! Izuku realized. He launched himself up, cresting the lip of the fortress and landing back on the surface. He sprinted across the rooftops, using gearshift for a split second to break the sound barrier, arriving at the north sector in seconds. A group of 20 villains had made it over the wall. They were sprinting toward the shelter. Target acquired. One of them yelled, seeing the massive blast doors in the distance. Crack it open. The hostages are inside. Izuku landed between them and the shelter. He hit the ground so hard the pavement shattered, creating a crater. The villains skidded to a halt. Izuku stood up slowly from the dust. He wasn't smiling. He was radiating an aura of pure intimidation. Turn around, Izuku said quietly. Jump off. And you live. The leader, a man with steel skin, laughed. It's just one kid. Rush him, they charged. Izuku didn't move until they were 10 feet away. Then, he unleashed Black Whip. Not as ropes, but as a chaotic, thrashing storm. Dozens of tendrils exploded from his back, lashing out in every direction. It was a massacre. Villains were snatched into the air, slammed into the ground, and thrown into each other. Izuku moved through the center of the chaos, ducking under a punch, weaving past a blade, delivering concise, surgical strikes to pressure points and solar plexuses. He broke the steel-skinned man's arm with a 30% chop. He shattered the kneecap of a speedster. Within 30 seconds, all 20 villains were on the ground, groaning or unconscious. Izuku stood over them, his chest heaving. He wiped blood from his lip. Behind you! Danger Sense whispered. Izuku spun around. Standing on top of a water tower, watching him, was a creature. It was tall, sleek, and black, with an exposed brain. But it wasn't the hulking mass of the USJ Noma. It was leaner. Faster, a near high-end. It shrieked, a sound that grated against the soul, and lunged. It covered the distance in a blink. Izuku barely got his arms up in a cross block. Boom! The impact sent Izuku skidding backward 100 feet, his boots carving trenches in the concrete. His arms throbbed. This thing hit like a truck. Regeneration. Strength. Speed, Izuku analyzed instantly. The Noma didn't let up. It fired bone spears from its shoulders. Izuku dodged, weaving through the projectiles. He closed the distance. Detroit smash! He slammed a fist into the Noma's gut. The creature folded, but as it flew back, its tail whipped around and slashed Izuku's side. Izuku hissed, clutching his ribs. The cut was shallow, but it stung. The Noma recovered midair, landing on all fours, drool dripping from its beak. It grinned, and then, 3 more landed beside it, 4 near Hyans. Izuku stood alone in the center of the plaza. The wind howled. 4 of them, Izuku whispered. Okay. He tapped into the stockpile. He felt the vestiges rallying around him. I can't let you pass, Izuku said to the monsters. I won't. He triggered smokescreen again, filling the plaza with purple fog. But this time, he didn't hide in it. He charged into it. The fight that followed was brutal. It was a brawl in a phone booth. The Nomas were fast, but Danger Sense allowed Izuku to react before they even moved. He used the smoke to blind them, turning their aggression against them. He tricked one Nomu into impaling another with a bone spear. He used float to drag one into the air, spinning it rapidly with Black Whip before slamming it back down onto the concrete skull first. He tore the arm off the third one with a limit break burst of strength. It wasn't elegant. It was ugly, desperate violence. When the last Noma fell, its head crushed by a falling piece of masonry Izuku had pulled down with Black Whip, the sun was beginning to crest over the horizon. Dawn of the second day. The light of dawn revealed the carnage. The North Plaza was destroyed. Craters littered the ground. The bodies of the 4 Nomas were dissolving into gray sludge. Izuku sat on a piece of rubble, his head hanging low. His costume was shredded. The right sleeve was gone entirely, revealing the scars on his arm. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye and the slash on his side. He was thirsty. God, he was so thirsty. He reached for his belt, but his canteen was empty. He had given the last of it to a dehydrated child in the shelter before he left. You need calories, the first user said gently. And rest. Can't, Izuku croaked. He stood up, his legs trembling. He walked to the edge of the perimeter again. The villains had pulled back with the sunrise, retreating to the shadows of the ruins below to regroup. They knew the hero was tired. They knew he couldn't keep this up forever. They were waiting for him to collapse. Izuku looked out over the evacuation zone. He saw the smoke rising from the villain camps. He saw the banners of the Paranormal Liberation Front being raised on the adjacent hills. They were digging in for a siege. Izuku turned back toward the shelter. He walked slowly, limped slightly. He approached the camera mounted above the blast doors. He knew Mei was watching. Handsome, he said into his comms. I see you, Midoriya. Mei's voice came back. She sounded tired, too. You actually stopped them. For now, Izuku said. How are the levels? Silence on the line. Bad, Mei admitted. The life support systems are draining faster than I calculated. The comatose heroes, their bodies are fighting the quirk. It takes more energy to keep them stable. We have maybe 6 hours of power left before we have to start choosing who gets oxygen. Izuku closed his eyes. 6 hours. He looked at his shaking hands. He could barely make a fist. Is there any other source? Izuku asked. There's a massive industrial generator, Mei said, her voice hesitant. We scanned it on the approach. It's in the ruins of the support item development plant. About 4 miles south. 4 miles. Through the heart of the villain army. While leaving the fortress undefended. If I go, Izuku said, who protects the fortress? We have the automated turrets, Mei said. And I can rig some of the robots. But they won't hold against high-ends. They'll buy you maybe 30 minutes. 4 miles, Izuku repeated. There and back. Carrying a generator, he looked at the rising sun. It didn't look hopeful. It looked like a timer. I'll do it, Izuku said. Midoriya, you haven't slept in 20 hours. You're bleeding. I'll sleep when everyone is safe, Izuku said. The lie came easier this time. He turned away from the camera, staring south toward the ruins. Prepare the turrets, Handsome. I'm going for a run. He stood on the edge of the precipice, the wind cooling his feverish skin. He was Atlas, and the sky was heavy. But he couldn't put it down. Not yet. He tightened his remaining glove. The silence was over. The siege had begun. Now came the mission. Izuku Midoriya stepped off the ledge. The descent from the floating fortress was the easy part. Gravity, after all, was always eager to reclaim things that dared to fly. Izuku Midoriya fell through the twilight, the wind tearing at his exposed skin, his tattered cape snapping violently behind him like a broken wing. Above him, the sky coffin drifted among the clouds, a dark, silent monolith housing the last breathing hope of Japan. Below him lay the abyss, the ruined sprawl of the evacuation zone, now a festering hive of villainy, lit only by the fires of looting and the harsh white glare of searchlights. He hit the ground in a roll, using Black Whip to snag a lamppost and kill his momentum before his boots touched the pavement. He didn't land with a crash. He landed with a whisper. He was a ghost dropping into a graveyard. Danger sense was a dull, rhythmic throb at the base of his skull. It wasn't warning him of immediate attacks, but rather the ambient malice that saturated the air. It was the psychic equivalent of standing in a room full of radiation. Izuku stood up, adjusting the heavy utility belt Mei had strapped to him. His body felt wrong. It was light too light. He had been running on adrenaline and the stockpile of one for all for nearly 30 hours. He hadn't eaten a real meal. He hadn't slept. His biology was beginning to eat itself. Pace yourself, Ninth. The voice of Heike Shinomori echoed in his mind. Your cortisol levels are critical. Your perception is going to start drifting. I know, Izuku whispered into the darkness. I just need the generator. 4 miles. He started to run. He didn't sprint. He moved with a loping, predatory gait, sticking to the shadows of the crushed buildings. He was a splash of dark green paint moving against a black canvas. The city was dead, yet teeming with life. He passed an intersection and saw a group of convicts roasting something over a fire made of broken furniture. He saw a villain with a mutation quirk tearing the steel shutters off a pharmacy. He could have stopped them. Every fiber of his being screamed to jump in, to save the property, to apprehend the criminals. That was what a hero did. But he wasn't just a hero tonight. He was a lifeline. Ignore them. The second user, Kudo, commanded sharply. Every second you waste on trash is a second of oxygen lost for the people in the fortress. Eyes forward, Izuku grit his teeth, forcing himself to look away. He moved on, silent and unseen. As he ran, the silence of his own mind began to fray. The exhaustion was peeling back the layers of his mental defenses. He turned a corner near a collapsed overpass, and he stopped. Standing there, in the middle of the street, was All Might. Not the skeletal Tashinori Yagi, but the Titan. The symbol of peace in his Golden Age costume, standing tall, hands on his hips, his smile shining like the sun. All Might? Izuku gasped, his heart leaping into his throat. You're here! You! He took a step forward, reaching out. All Might didn't move. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes were hollow. Empty sockets pouring black smoke. You are failing, my boy, the hallucination said. The voice wasn't All Might's booming baritone. It was Izuku's own voice, distorted and cruel. You are too slow. They are dying up there because you are weak. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. No. No, you're not real. Izuku! Snap out of it! The first user, Yoichi, shouted in his head. There is no one there. It's a phantom caused by sleep deprivation. Keep moving! Izuku opened his eyes. The street was empty. Just a torn poster of All Might flapping on a brick wall. He swallowed a lump of bile and kept running. The ghosts were starting early. The boneyard, the support item development plant, was a husk. Located in the industrial sector, the facility had been shelled during the initial uprising. The roof was caved in, and the walls were scorched black. This was where the generator was. Izuku approached the perimeter fence, which had been flattened by a tank tread. He scanned the area. Danger sense was quiet, too quiet. He slipped inside the main hangar. It was a cavernous space filled with the skeletons of giant robots and half-built support items. Moonlight filtered through the holes in the ceiling, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Hatsum said Sector 4, Izuku muttered, vaulting over a conveyor belt. He found it. The generator was massive. It was a block of industrial machinery the size of a small van, painted a dull orange, bolted to the concrete floor. It was a high-output fusion cell backup, designed to power an entire factory line. Okay, Izuku breathed, staring at the beast. Okay. He walked up to it. He grabbed the thick steel casing. It was cold. May said it weighs about 4 tons, he whispered. With the casing, you can lift it, the fifth user, Banjo, said. But carrying it 4 miles? Without dropping it? While avoiding patrols? That's the hard part. I don't have a choice. Izuku flared one for all. Green lightning crackled around him, illuminating the dark hangar. He summoned Black Whip. 10 thick tendrils erupted from his back, wrapping around the generator, finding purchase on the structural frame. 1, 2, 3, Izuku pulled. His boots cracked the concrete floor. His muscles screamed. With a groan of tearing metal, the bolts anchoring the generator to the floor sheared off. The machine lifted into the air. It was heavy. Immensely heavy. It wasn't just the weight, it was the awkwardness of it. It was a dead weight that shifted and swung. Izuku adjusted his stance. He wrapped the Black Whip tendrils around his torso, creating a harness, distributing the weight across his shoulders and hips. He looked like a beast of burden, a mule carrying a mountain. Float, he commanded. He became weightless, but the generator didn't. The disparity was disorienting. He had to use float to negate his own mass so he could move faster, but he still had to physically drag the 4 tons of machinery through the air. He took a step. Then another. He moved toward the exit. As he stepped out of the hangar and back into the night, the world shimmered. For a second, the ruined factory wasn't a factory. It was the UA classroom. He saw Ochako Uraraka sitting at her desk. She was smiling at him. Deku-kun, she said softly. Why didn't you save me? Izuku stumbled, the generator swinging dangerously and smashing into a wall. Dust rained down. He looked again. Uraraka wasn't smiling. She was gray. Lifeless. There were tubes in her arms. I am saving you, Izuku whispered, tears pricking his eyes. I'm trying. He blinked, and the classroom was gone. He was back in the industrial wasteland, the cold wind drying the sweat on his face. Get a grip, he hissed to himself. He began the trek back. The hunter. Mile 1 was agony. Mile 2 was torture. Izuku couldn't run at full speed. The aerodynamics of the generator made it impossible. He was moving at a fast jog, sticking to the alleys, the massive machine floating behind him like a morbid balloon tethered by black veins. Every step sent a jolt of pain through his spine. His fractured arm, which he had been ignoring, was throbbing in time with his heartbeat. He was crossing a dried-out canal, the concrete riverbed offering a straight shot toward the fortress, when danger sense didn't just buzz, it screamed. Death. It was a sharp, piercing needle to the brain. Not a general warning, but a specific, localized vector of incoming termination. Izuku didn't think. He dropped. He slammed his body flat against the concrete, the generator crashing down beside him with a deafening clang. A split second later, the air where his head had been exploded. Crack boom. A bullet. But not a normal bullet. It was a swirling mass of pink and purple energy, twisting through the air with terrifying velocity. It impacted the canal wall behind him and blew a crater the size of a car into the concrete. Sniper! Izuku yelled, scrambling to his feet. He grabbed the generator with Black Whip and hauled it behind a concrete pillar. That range! The third user whispered, his voice tense. That velocity, and the curve. There is only one person who can make a shot like that. Izuku peeked around the pillar. Another shot whizzed past, curving unnervingly around the cover, grazing his cheek. It cut the skin like a razor. Lady Nagant, Izuku realized, his blood running cold. He looked up. On top of a suspension bridge tower, nearly a mile away, was a silhouette. She's supposed to be in the hospital, Izuku stammered. She was hurt. She was, all for one, Yoichi said sadly. He must have taken her. He's using her again. Izuku felt a surge of rage. Not at Nagant, but at the man who treated people like pawns. Midoriya, you cannot fight her carrying that thing, the second user warned. You are a sitting duck. Drop the generator. No! Izuku shouted. If I drop it and she shoots it, everyone dies. Hatsum said this is the only one. Then you die. I won't die. And I won't let her kill them. Izuku crouched low. He couldn't stay here. She would curve the bullets until she found an angle. He had to close the distance. A mile. While carrying 4 tons. Against the best sniper in the world. Smoke screen. Izuku flooded the canal with purple smoke. It billowed out, filling the trench. He grabbed the generator. 6th. I need maximum output on the smoke. Cover everything. Under the cover of the fog, Izuku moved. He didn't run away. He ran toward the bridge. Bang. 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 Shots fired blindly into the smoke. They were seeking rounds. Izuku could feel the air pressure changes as they zipped past him. One struck the generator's casing, sparking violently. Don't break. Please don't break, Izuku prayed. He burst out of the smoke, 300 yards from the bridge tower. Nagant was there. She was standing on a support cable. Izuku zoomed in with his vision. She looked wrong. Her hair was matted. Her clothes were the same hospital gown she had been wearing, now torn and stained with grease. But it was her face that stopped Izuku's heart. Her eyes were blank. Completely white. No pupils. No iris. Just a void. And floating behind her, like a puppeteer's strings, were tendrils of dark red energy. All for one's control quirk. Target acquired. Nagant's voice drifted down, amplified by the wind. It was robotic. Monotone. Obstacle. Izuku Midoriya. Lethal force authorized. She raised her right arm, the rifle growing out of her elbow. Nagant! Izuku screamed. It's me! Wake up! She fired. Izuku didn't dodge. He couldn't. The angle was too direct, and the generator was too slow. Faux 100%. Izuku combined FA Gene and Black Whip. He didn't move himself. He swung the generator. He whipped the massive machine in front of him like a shield. The bullet struck the generator's thick steel housing. Gong! The sound was ear-splitting. The impact forced through Izuku backward. He slid across the ground, his heels digging in. The generator held. Barely. A deep dent smoked in the center. She's going to destroy it, Izuku panted. I have to stop her. He looked at the tower. She was reloading. Her hair was twisting, forming new bullets. I can't fly up there with this weight. I'm too slow. He looked at the generator. Then at the tower. Newton's third law, Izuku muttered. He wrapped Black Whip around the generator. He charged Fa Gene into his legs until they burned. Gearshift, overdrive. He shifted the speed of the generator. He didn't lift it. He threw it. With a roar that tore his throat, Izuku hurled the 4-ton machine straight up into the air. It soared upward, a heavy, orange projectile. Freed from the weight, Izuku was a bullet. He kicked off the ground, the concrete shattering. He broke the sound barrier instantly. Boom! He raced the generator upward. Nagant tracked him. She aimed. Too slow, Izuku whispered. He reached the generator in midair. He grabbed it again, spinning around it, using it as a pivot point in the sky. Nagant fired. The bullet missed Izuku and hit the generator again, but glanced off the angled surface. Izuku was now above her. Let her go, all for one. Izuku screamed. He released the generator, letting it hang in the air with float. He dove down at Nagant. She tried to track him, but he was moving faster than thought. He didn't punch her. He didn't smash her. He tackled her. He slammed into her midair, wrapping his arms around her, pinning her rifle arm to her side. They crashed onto the suspension bridge deck. Nagant thrashed with superhuman strength. She tried to deploy a hidden blade from her knee. Nagant! Listen to me! Izuku pleaded, holding her down. You're a hero! You possess the heart of a hero. Eliminate, she droned. Eliminate. She opened her mouth. A gun barrel emerged from her throat. Danger! Izuku jerked his head to the side just as a bullet grazed his ear, blowing a hole in the bridge deck. She was gone. There was no Nagant in there right now. Just a machine. I'm sorry, Izuku wept. He gathered one for all into his right hand. 20%. Precise. Controlled. He chopped her hard on the vagus nerve in her neck. Nagant's eyes widened for a second, the white fading to a brief flash of violet confusion, before she went limp. Izuku collapsed on top of her, gasping for air. Silence returned to the bridge. Is she? She's alive! The fourth user confirmed. Unconscious. The mind control link is dormant. Izuku rolled off her. He lay on his back, staring up at the sky. The generator was still floating up there, drifting slowly in the wind. I have to get back, Izuku wheezed. He sat up. The world spun. Dark spots danced in his vision. He looked at Nagant. She was small, frail-looking in the moonlight. I can't leave her, Izuku said. Izuku! The second user said, his voice unusually soft. You can barely walk. You have to carry a 4-ton generator 3 more miles. You cannot carry her too. If I leave her, the villains will find her. Or All for One will detonate her again. If you try to carry both, you will collapse. And then everyone in the fortress dies. It's simple math. Izuku stood up. His legs shook so hard his knees knocked together. I don't care about the math, Izuku said. He reached up with Black Whip and snagged the floating generator, pulling it down until it hovered behind him like a burden. Then, he bent down and scooped Lady Nagant into his arms. She was light compared to the machine, but she was one more weight. One more responsibility. I save everyone, Izuku muttered, his eyes burning with a manic, terrifying light. That's the deal. I save everyone. He began to walk. The long walk. The journey back was not a hero's march. It was a funeral procession of one. Izuku didn't run. He couldn't. He walked. 1 step. Drag. 2 steps. Drag. The generator floated behind him, but the strain of maintaining the quirks was eating him alive. His head pounded. His vision was tunneling. He started seeing them again. The ghosts. He saw Sir Night Eye standing on a street corner, adjusting his glasses. You possess no foresight, Midoriya, the Phantom Night Eye said coldly. This ends with your death. I know, Izuku mumbled, walking past him. He saw Gran Torino lying in a pool of blood. You're too slow, kid. I know. He saw Kaken. Not the comatose Bakugo, but the child Bakugo. He was standing in the middle of the road, pointing and laughing. Useless Deku. You think you can do it all alone? You're just a pebble. Shut up, Kaken, Izuku rasped. The hallucinations grew more vivid. The buildings around him seemed to twist and melt. The shadows reached out like claws. He felt the generator slipping. His grip on Black Whip was failing. Hold it! Banjo yelled in his mind. Don't you dare let go! That's Edshot's life. That's Mirko's life! Izuku screamed, a guttural, animalistic sound, and tightened the mental leash. Blood began to drip from his nose. He looked down at Nagant in his arms. She was sleeping peacefully. She looked like a victim, not a villain. Almost there, he saw the fortress. It was looming in the distance, dark and silent, but between him and the fortress was the cliff. He had to climb back up. How? Izuku whimpered. How do I go up? He stood at the base of the floating island's shadow. The Black Whip cables he had set up earlier were dangling hundreds of feet above. He couldn't jump this high with this weight. He fell to his knees. I can't, he whispered. I can't do it. He bowed his head. The generator hovered inches off the ground. Nagant slipped slightly in his grip. Stand up. The voice wasn't a vestige. It wasn't a ghost. It was a memory. Eat this. Izuku's eyes snapped open. He remembered All Might on the beach. He remembered the feeling of eating the hare. The acceptance of the burden. I am here, Izuku whispered. He didn't stand up with his legs. He stood up with Black Whip. He drove tendrils into the ground, turning himself into a tripod. Then, he shot 2 more tendrils up, way up. They latched onto the fortress's lower scaffolding. Retract, Izuku hissed. He began to haul himself up. He wasn't flying. He was being winched up by his own energy. He dangled in the void, the generator below him, Nagant in his arms, pulling himself hand over hand, tendril over tendril. His muscles tore. He could feel the fibers snapping. Just a little more. He crested the lip of the landing bay. Mei Hatsum was there. She was waiting with a team of robots. Midoriya! She screamed. Izuku pulled himself over the edge. He collapsed onto the steel deck. The generator landed with a heavy thud behind him. Mei and the robots rushed forward. They grabbed the generator. They grabbed Nagant. You did it! Mei cried, checking the generator. It's damaged, but I can bypass the casing. We have power! She looked at Izuku. He was lying face down. He wasn't moving. Midoriya? Mei touched his shoulder. Izuku flinched. He pushed himself up. His arms were trembling so violently they looked like they were vibrating. Is it plugged in? Izuku croaked. Is everyone safe? We're plugging it in now, Mei said. Midoriya, you need medical attention. You're in shock. Izuku stood up. He swayed like a drunkard. No, he said. He looked out at the perimeter. The sun was gone. It was night again. The villains were massing. He could hear them. I have to go back to the wall, Izuku mumbled. He took a step and nearly fell. You can't. Mei grabbed him. You've been awake for 40 hours. You're hallucinating. I saw you talking to thin air. Izuku looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles, but the green fire within them was still burning, dim, but hot. If I sleep, Izuku whispered, they wake up to a nightmare. He gently pushed Mei away. Plug it in, Hatsum. Wake them up. He turned and stumbled toward the gate. He didn't look like a hero anymore. He looked like a revenant. A ghost haunting the halls of the living, refusing to move on until the job was done. As he walked into the shadows, he heard a voice behind him. Midoriya. He turned. He expected another ghost. But it was Lady Nagant. She was on a stretcher, barely conscious, looking at him with wide, confused eyes. Why? She rasped. Why didn't you leave me? Izuku looked at her. He didn't smile. He was too tired to smile. Because, Izuku said, his voice hollow. You were heavy. But leaving you behind would have been heavier. He turned back to the dark. The ghosts were still there, waiting for him in the shadows. But for now, the lights in the fortress flickered back on, and inside the deep silence of the coma ward, a heart monitor beeped, strong and steady. Time had ceased to be a linear concept. It was no longer measured in hours, minutes, or seconds. It was measured in waves. There was the wave of noise, the screaming of the villains, the roar of quirks, the screech of metal tearing against stone. There was the wave of silence, the brief, terrifying intermissions where the enemy pulled back to regroup, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling through the skeleton of the UA fortress. And there was the wave of pain, a constant, rhythmic tide that crashed against Izuku Midoriya's consciousness, threatening to pull him under. It had been 3 days. 72 hours. 72 hours since the sky turned black. 72 hours since his friends fell asleep. 72 hours since Izuku Midoriya had closed his eyes for more than a blink. He stood atop the gargoyle of the East Tower, a lone sentinel against the apocalypse. The rain had started 6 hours ago, a cold, oily rain mixed with the ash and soot rising from the burning ruins of the city below. It plastered his hair to his skull and soaked into the tattered remnants of his costume. He didn't look like a hero anymore. The Deku who smiled to reassure the public was dead and buried. In his place stood a cryptid. His cowl was torn, one of the long rabbit-like ears sheared off halfway, giving him a lopsided, broken silhouette. The dark green fabric of his suit was stained almost black with dried blood, grime, and hydraulic fluid. His iron saws were cracked. But it was his posture that was the most terrifying. He didn't stand tall. He hunched, his arms hanging low, twitching with the restless energy of black whip tendrils that writhed around him like living serpents, sensing threats before he did. And his eyes, under the shadow of his mask, his eyes were glowing pools of toxic green, rimmed with red veins so thick they looked like cracks in porcelain. They didn't blink. They just stared into the abyss, waiting for the abyss to blink first. Ninth. The fourth user, Heike Shinomori, whispered. His voice was no longer clinical. It was pleading. Your heart rate is erratic. You are experiencing micro-sleeps while standing. You need to sit down. Can't, Izuku mumbled. His voice was a rasp, like sandpaper over gravel. If I sit, I won't get up. If you don't sit, you will fall. The fifth user, Banjo, added, devoid of his usual funk energy. Kid, you're running on fumes. Actually, you're past fumes. You're running on the engine block melting down. Danger sense, Izuku croaked. Report. It's a mess, Izuku. Heikage admitted. The ambient hostility is so high I can't filter it anymore. It's just a constant scream. Izuku lifted a hand and struck the side of his head, hard. Thwack. Focus, he hissed to the quirk. Filter it. Find the spikes. Below him, in the darkness, a flare went up. Then another. The villains were signaling. They were probing the perimeter again. They knew he was alone. They were testing the fences, looking for the weak point in the electric fence. They didn't realize the fence was a single, breaking boy. Sector 7, Izuku muttered. He didn't jump. He fell forward, letting gravity take him, catching the wind with float at the last second to glide like a phantom toward the disturbance. The monster in the hallway. The interior of the fortress was supposed to be a sanctuary. The central shelter, the massive underground gymnasium where thousands of civilians and comatose heroes were huddled, was sealed tight. But the panic inside was beginning to rival the danger outside. In the supply corridors leading to the shelter, a group of civilians had cornered a UA logistics robot. We need more water! A man shouted, smashing a pipe against the robot's chassis. My kids are thirsty. Why are you rationing us? Please remain calm, the robot chirped, its voice synthesized and glitching. Water reserves are at 40%. Rationing is mandatory per Hero Deku's orders. Hero Deku? A woman spat. We haven't seen a hero in days. Just that thing patrolling the walls. How do we know he hasn't locked us in here to die? Yeah. Another man yelled. Where is Endeavor? Where is Genist? Why aren't they here? The mob mentality was setting in. Fear, confined in a small space, turns to anger. They began to shove the robot. Crash. The service door at the end of the hallway was ripped off its hinges. It flew through the air, embedding itself in the opposite wall with a deafening clang. The mob froze. Standing in the doorway was Izuku. He was dripping wet. Mud and black slime coated his legs. He was breathing heavy, ragged gasps that sounded like a bellows with a hole in it. Black whip tendrils floated around him, pulsating with a menacing purple light. He looked at the civilians. He didn't see people. He saw non-combatants. He saw objectives. Step away from the droid, Izuku said. The man with the pipe dropped it. It clattered loudly on the floor. We just want water, the woman stammered, stepping back, clutching her shawl. She looked at Izuku with wide, terrified eyes. She didn't recognize him. She saw the glowing eyes and the blood. She saw a villain. Rations are calculated, Izuku said, walking forward. He moved with a stiff, jerky gait. If we drink freely, we run out in 2 days. Then everyone dies. He reached the robot and placed a hand on its dented chassis. Status? Minor structural damage, the robot replied. Izuku turned his head slowly to look at the man who had hit the robot. The man flinched, backing into the wall, trembling. Don't break the equipment, Izuku rasped. I can't fix it. You. The man whispered, his voice shaking. You're scaring the children. Look at you. You're a monster. Izuku froze. He looked past the man. Peeking out from behind a crate was a little girl, maybe 5 years old. She was clutching a stuffed All Might doll. She was staring at Izuku with pure, unadulterated terror. Tears were streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at her savior. She was looking at the boogeyman. Izuku felt a sharp pain in his chest that had nothing to do with his broken ribs. He tried to soften his expression. He tried to lower the black whip. But his control was slipping. The tendrils lashed out involuntarily, knocking a light fixture off the ceiling. The girl screamed, "Get away from us!" The mother yelled, pulling the girl back. Izuku took a step back. Then another. Izuku started, but his throat seized up. What could he say? I'm doing this for you. I'm dying for you. Stay inside, Izuku whispered. He turned and limped away, back toward the darkness of the service tunnels. He couldn't be around them. He was toxic. He was radioactive with violence. If he stayed, he would only make them more afraid. Izuku. The first user's voice was soft, filled with pity. Shut up, Izuku hissed under his breath. Just shut up. The feast of dust. He ended up in the ruined cafeteria of the academic block. The windows were blown out, letting the rain blow in. May Hatsum found him there 20 minutes later. She looked rough. Her pink dreadlocks were tied back with a piece of wire. Her face was smudged with grease, and she walked with the exhaustion of someone who had been keeping a city-sized machine running with duct tape and prayers. She was carrying a tray. On it was a pouch of high-calorie nutrient jelly and a bottle of water. She found Izuku sitting on the floor in the corner, his knees pulled to his chest, staring at a puddle of rainwater. Midoriya, May said softly. She didn't yell. She didn't invent a gadget. She just walked over and sat down next to him, ignoring the wet floor. Izuku didn't move. You need to eat, May said, placing the tray between them. Izuku looked at the pouch. How are the levels? Don't ask me about the levels, May snapped gently. I'm asking about your levels. You haven't eaten since the generator run. I'm not hungry, Izuku lied. His stomach was a knotted cramp of starvation, but his mind rejected the concept of food. Bullshit, May said. You're vibrating. Your blood sugar is crashing. Eat the jelly. Izuku looked at the food. Suddenly, a vision superimposed itself over the pouch. He saw Bakugo's face, pale and gaunt, hooked up to a feeding tube in the shelter below. He saw Uraraka's thin, still form. They aren't eating, Izuku whispered. May sighed, rubbing her temples. They are on IVs, Midoriya. They are getting nutrients. You are burning 10,000 calories a day fighting an army. It's not the same. It feels the same, Izuku murmured. If I stop, if I take a break to eat, someone might get in. Someone might die because I was snacking. You are going to die if you don't. May grabbed his shoulder. Midoriya, look at me. Izuku turned his head. His green eyes bore into hers. May flinched, but she held her ground. You look like a corpse, Izuku. A walking corpse. If you collapse, who protects them? Who protects me? That got through. Izuku looked at her hand on his shoulder. It was trembling. She was scared. Not of him, but for him. He reached out with a shaking hand and took the pouch. He tore the top off with his teeth. He squeezed the gelatinous goop into his mouth. It tasted like chemicals and ash. He gagged, his throat seizing, but he forced himself to swallow. Good, May whispered. Now the water. He drank the water. Sleep, May suggested, pushing her luck. I rigged the perimeter sensors to alarm directly to my headset. I can wake you up if anything bigger than a cat moves. Just 20 minutes. Give your brain a reset? Izuku shook his head violently. No. No sleep. Why? Because of the dreams, Izuku whispered, staring back into the puddle. What dreams? The silence, Izuku said. When I sleep, I see the world quiet. I see everyone dead. And I'm the only one left alive because I was too strong to die. I walk through a graveyard of everyone I ever loved, and it's my fault. He looked at May, tears leaking from his bloodshot eyes. I can't go there, Hatsum. It's worse than the villains. I have to stay awake. If I stay awake, I can control it. May stared at him, heartbroken. She realized then that the Atlas holding up the sky wasn't just using his muscles. He was using his sanity as mortar. Okay, May whispered. Okay. No sleep. But stay here for 5 minutes. Just sit. 5 minutes, Izuku agreed. He leaned his head back against the wall, and instantly, his mind fractured. The court of ghosts. He didn't fall asleep. He fell in. The cafeteria vanished. The rain stopped. The smell of ozone was replaced by the smell of old parchment and sterile air. He was in the vestige world, but it wasn't the calm, aurora-filled void he was used to. It was a storm. The throne room of One for All was crumbling. The chairs where the users sat were cracked, and standing in the center of the room, blocking his path, was the second user. Kudo. Kudo looked furious. His arms were crossed, his scar glowing angrily. You are a fool, Kudo spat. Izuku stood before him, his avatar within the mindscape looking just as tattered and broken as his physical body. Get out of my way. I have to go back. 5 minutes is up. You aren't going back, Kudo said cold. Not until you listen. You are dying, ninth. Your body is entering the initial stages of organ failure. Your heart is arrhythmia. Your muscles are dissolving. I don't care, Izuku said, trying to push past him. I have black lip. I have FA gene. I can move without muscles. For how long? Kudo grabbed Izuku by the collar of his shirt and slammed him backward. Another day? 2? And then what? You die. And when the holder of One for All dies without a successor, the quirk dies with him. You are risking the only weapon capable of stopping All for One because you have a martyr complex. It's not a complex. Izuku screamed, shoving Kudo back. The force of his anger shook the mental realm. It's necessity. Look outside. Who else is there? Who? Retreat. Kudo yelled back. Take the civilians. Abandon the fortress. Run to the mountains. Hide until the heroes wake up. I can't move the sleepers. Izuku roared. There are hundreds of them on life support. If I disconnect them to move them, they die. If I leave them, the villains kill them. There is no retreat. Then you choose, Kudo said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You save the few, or you save the future. You let the sleepers die. You save the active civilians. You escape. You live to fight Shigaraki. Izuku stared at him. The logic was cold. Brutal. Tactical. It was the logic of a soldier in a losing war. No, Izuku whispered. It is the only way. No! Izuku screamed. Green lightning exploded from his avatar, shattering the floor of the mindscape. I am not you, second. I don't trade lives. I don't sacrifice people for the greater good. That's what they do. That's what All for One does. Izuku stepped forward, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. I will save everyone. The civilians. The heroes. The sleepers. My mom. Everyone. And I will do it alone if I have to. I will break every bone. I will burn every drop of blood. I will tear my soul apart piece by piece to keep that wall standing. He poked a finger into Kudo's chest. So stop telling me to die. Stop telling me to run. And start helping me fight. Kudo stared at him. For a long moment, there was silence in the void. Then Kudo smirked. It wasn't a nice smile, but it was a respectful one. You stubborn brat, Kudo muttered. You really are crazy. Help me, Izuku demanded. Fine, Kudo said. But gearshift is off the table. Your heart can't take the recoil. We use Black Whip for structure. FA Gene for efficiency. Danger Sense for targeting. We turn you into a machine. A machine, Izuku agreed. I can be a machine. The world shattered. The machine. Izuku snapped his eyes open in the cafeteria. Midoriya? May asked. You checked out for a second there. I'm awake, Izuku said. He stood up. Something had changed. The twitching had stopped. The shaking in his hands was gone. He stood perfectly still. His eyes were no longer frantic. They were cold. Dead calm. Handsome, Izuku said, his voice void of emotion. Route all power from the heating systems to the perimeter floodlights. I want the kill zone illuminated. But it'll get freezing in the shelter, May argued. Blankets, Izuku said. Cold is better than dead. Do it. He didn't wait for a response. He walked to the window and leaped out. He didn't use float to glide gracefully. He shot a Black Whip tendril to a corner of the building and swung with mathematical precision, conserving momentum. He landed on the outer wall. The villains were surging again. A massive wave this time. They had brought a battering ram, a modified construction vehicle armored with scrap metal. Target acquired, Izuku whispered. He didn't yell a smash name. He didn't monologue. He moved. He dropped into the horde. It wasn't a fight. It was an extermination of will. Izuku moved with an efficiency that was terrifying to behold. He dodged bullets by millimeters, moving only as much as necessary. He struck joints, nerve clusters, and weapons. Snap. Crunch. Thud. A villain with a sword quirk lunged. Izuku caught the blade with a Black Whip-coated hand, shattered the weapon, and drove a palm strike into the villain's chin. The man dropped instantly. Another villain tried to blast him with fire. Izuku grabbed a third villain, used him as a human shield, angling him so the armor took the hit, not the flesh, and then threw the scorched villain at the fire user. He was a blur of violence. He reached the battering ram. The driver, a man with a bull head, looked out the slit. Run him over! The driver screamed. Izuku stood in front of the multi-ton vehicle. He didn't brace himself. He placed one hand on the front bumper. FA Gene. Build up. Release. He didn't punch it. He pushed it. A pulse of kinetic energy traveled through the vehicle. The engine block cracked. The axles shattered. The vehicle crumpled in on itself like a crushed soda can. The momentum stopped instantly. The driver flew through the windshield, landing at Izuku's feet. Izuku looked down at him. Leave, Izuku said. The bullman looked up at the glowing green eyes, the broken mask, the rain-slit demon standing over him. Monster. The villain whimpered. You're a monster. Yes, Izuku agreed. He turned his back on them. The villains hesitated. They looked at the destroyed vehicle. They looked at the pile of unconscious bodies. They looked at the lone figure standing in the rain, and for the first time in 3 days, they didn't charge. They backed away. Fear. Pure, primal fear. Izuku stood there, watching them retreat into the shadows. They are breaking. Kudo noted in his mind. Their morale is gone. Good, Izuku thought. But as he stood there, the adrenaline fading, the reality of his condition came rushing back. A drop of blood fell from his nose. Then another. He coughed, and it was wet. He looked down at his hand. He was coughing up blood. His lungs were beginning to tear from the strain of one for all. Not yet, Izuku whispered to his body. Don't break yet. He looked up at the sky. The clouds were thick, hiding the stars. I'm still here, he said to the silence. I'm still standing. But he wasn't standing straight anymore. He was listing to the left, just like the fortress. From the darkness of a high-rise ruin miles away, a drone camera zoomed in on him. All for One watched the feed on a monitor. He is evolving, the demon lord mused, his voice echoing in his lair. He is shedding his humanity to become a symbol. How tragic. All for One smiled. He believes he can endure the physical assault. He believes he can outlast the army. He tapped a button on his console. Let us see how he endures the heart. On the screen surrounding All for One, images began to load. Images of the interior of the UA fortress. Images of the students sleeping in the shelter. Images captured by spy drones weeks ago. Phase 2, All for One commanded. Psychological warfare. Back on the wall, Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Danger sense didn't spike. It went cold. A massive holographic projection flickered to life in the sky above the villain army. A screen, hundreds of feet wide. Izuku looked up. The screen crackled with static, then dissolved into an image. It was a live feed of a hospital bed. In the bed was a woman. She was sleeping. She had green hair. Mom? Izuku breathed, his machine-like facade cracking instantly. The voice of All for One boomed across the battlefield, amplified by speakers miles away. Good evening, Izuku Midoriya. You look tired. Izuku fell to his knees, his hands clutching his head. Let's play a game, the voice purred. The vigilante's burden had just gotten heavier. The physical war was a stalemate. The mental war had just begun.